Once again, we welcome Herb Kaighan to our meeting. I think most of you know him. He's been with us for more than 2 years, teaching us about emotional sobriety, along with Alan Berger. Today, Herb's going to look at the 12 steps and how they relate to emotional sobriety. But in particular, he's going to teach us about our way of life with the 12 steps and how it affects our emotional sobriety. And I can't wait to hear what he has to teach me again today. So Herb, it's really, really good to see you. And I know everyone else is eager to hear what you have to say. So it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Susie, and thanks, Patrick, for inviting me to take this time really to place emotional sobriety in a huge context. We're stepping back now. We're stepping way back. We're getting some distance and some perspective on what we mean by emotional sobriety. What does it contain? What's its purpose? What's its content? What's its process? In the last year, I've been thinking a lot about this for lots of reasons, which that's a story for a different day. All good stuff. But my experience, and I have a pretty broad now international experience because of the Zoom evolution in terms of my workshops over the last 3 years. And I'm stunned and appalled by the lack of understanding and the lack of connection to what Bill Wilson calls our way of life. No, I'm not underestimating it. I'm not understating, at least my reaction to it. And it might be limited and it might be incorrect. I'm not saying I'm correct. But today I'm going to talk about what I consider to be the best kept secrets in the room, in all 12 steps rooms. I'm exposed to all 12-step fellowships. I'm not in them. I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous. If I didn't say that, I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is February 21st, 1984. I've been after this for a long time. I've been doing step works out of the big book now for 35 years. And the distance between 35 and 39 is the time I was thawing out in my early recovery in the rooms of AA. Thawing out sufficiently where I could, in fact, become conscious enough to realize that I wasn't conscious enough. And then, in fact, more consciousness, and awakening was available to me through the 12-step process. So what are these best kept secrets? Einstein said the consciousness that created the problem cannot be the consciousness that solves the problem. I began using that quote because of the man who took me through the steps at 4 years of sobriety. Look up at the screen. He said, Herb, you have a lot of information, but you have very little transformation. 4 years sober, going to a meeting every day, calling a sponsor every day. I have a lot of knowledge, academic, book knowledge, but it had never been filtered through my heart to my feet, and my behavior had not changed. He said, if you really want to know who you are, Herb, he was very confrontational in the kindest of way, because he wanted me to experience, not just hear and not just know, but to experience the truth. He said, if you really want to know who you are and what your values are, look at your feet. In terms of how they behave, how do your feet move? And I offer that to you as a very quick key to open the door to inventory for yourself. If you want to know who you are, look at how you behave. Because how you behave is who you are. How you behave is what you value. How you behave tells you the truth. It's objective. There's very little discussion about it. Oh, some interpretation. That's where sponsors and step guides and therapists and spiritual directors come in handy. Objective people who will hopefully tell you the truth and risk hurting your feelings. I invite you to join me. You're all on mute, but you're welcome to pray out loud or quietly or not at all, but have at least the intention today for the next hour. I'll be talking for about 40 minutes, maybe 45, maybe 30 if you, we'll see. I never know because I'm quite spontaneous. I don't have a script here. Have the intention of an open mind and open heart and a gift of that. We're asking for spiritual intervention. We're not asking for us to open our minds. We're asking for the life force of the universe to enter our hearts and open it, to deliver us to an experience that we don't even know exists. God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, the 12 steps, our way of life, and you, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, the 12 steps, our way of living, and especially you. Our way of life is what Bill calls steps 10, 11, and 12, and he does it 20 different times in the big book. It's the part after recovery. It's the part after we finish the 9th step. It's the formula for a human spiritual way of life to stay connected with power. But I turned it into, rather than a noun, I turned it into a verb, our way of living, very active. So I'm going to discuss at least my perception of what the secrets are. First of all, what is spirituality? Lots of people have lots of words, blah, 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 blah. And I have words. I think spirituality and the translation of that would be relationship, a synonym for spirituality. Doesn't have to get fancy, and it doesn't have to include God, by the way. Spirituality does not have to include God, at least the word G-O-D, because there's a lot of negative valence around that, a lot of resistance, a lot of baggage amongst people who are interested in being better human beings, but they've had an unfortunate experience with the traditional word spirituality from whatever source. So think of it as relationship, a relationship with power, or we could even make it softer, a relationship with life, with a capital L, whatever that force or source is, our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with others. Notice this is the 3 stages of the rocket launch that Bill talks about. Bill Wilson, in the author of the 12-step program and the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Page 25. We are rocketed into a 4th dimension, he says on page 25. Rocketed. Well, think about it. I mean, practically, I have to get in the rocket. That's my job. But the rocket's going to deliver me where the rocket's going to go. That's the grace, my willingness to take action in God's grace, or the life force grace, or the power's grace, or whatever it is that you think delivers you to freedom. And he calls steps 10 through 12 our way of life. How many people really know that? That's not one of the secrets, by the way, although it might be, but that's not my intention today. Our way of life, practicing. Please hold that word. Life is a practice. Life is every day we practice. And we get better as we practice, and we get better to the extent that we have a coach, a trainer, whatever you call it, in whatever dimension you need it. It might be a doctor, it might be a psychiatrist, it might be a sponsor, it might be a step guide, it might be a therapist, it might be a priest, it might be a spiritual director. All of us, though, as human beings, need a mentor. The Buddhists talk about having three things for anybody who wants to live a robust human life: having a path, having a teacher, and having a community. If you're in a 12-step fellowship, we're all very fortunate to have all three of those. A path as the 12 steps. A teacher in the broadest of senses as a sponsor at the very least. Perhaps a step guide at the very most. And a community, that 12-step fellowship. The fellowship of the Spirit is very different than the spirit of the fellowship. Both important. Flip sides of the same coin. So we're going to talk about emotional and spiritual sobriety. Perhaps that's a new word for some of you, spiritual sobriety. And it's just my word right now for the last several years. Emotional sobriety being connected to step 10. I believe that's the tool of emotional sobriety. And steps 11 and 12 being spiritual sobriety, and more about that in a minute. And I call it our way of living, making it active, making it a verb, not just our way of life as an academic. Oh yeah, I understand that. No, our way of living as a verb. This is how my feet move. Do they? Bill says we're in the bondage of self, but of course the whole book was written for, and the 12-step fellowship of AA was developed for, the bondage of addiction, the bondage of alcohol. It's been broadened into hundreds of different 12-step fellowships based on a variety of addictions. Bondage of addiction is the first half of the first step. Bondage of self is the spiritual malady, unmanageability, the bondage of self, the second half of the first step. Bondage. Is your life serial suffering? Take a look at what is your suffering? That's a really good question in terms of a inventory. What is your suffering? It's very visible, it's very objective. Do you believe your life can change? What's the source of your suffering? That's a much more sophisticated, deeper question. What is your suffering is pretty obvious. What is the source of your suffering is maybe not so obvious. It was made obvious to me by steps 4 through 9 when I was 4 years sober. That's why I mentioned the difference between 39 years and 35 years. 39 years I've been sober. 35 years I've been awake. Freedom. I was delivered to freedom from my addiction, a story for a different day, before I ever came to AA. But then I came to AA and I thawed out in the rooms for 4 years until I was introduced to a man who talked to me about Einstein and the difference between head knowledge and heart knowledge and transformation and spiritual awakening. And I was restless, irritable, and discontented. 4 years of sobriety. Notice pathetic Herbie there. Free from his addiction, but not aware that he was holding bars that didn't have ceiling and walls and floor. But he needed to and was responsible for, and there was a process that he could engage in to release the bars. Steps 4 through 9. So what is unmanageability? I was given freedom from addiction, but here I am 4 years sober, restless, irritable, and discontented. This is one of the secrets. What is unmanageability? The second half of the first step. It's not clear in the big book, except if you have somebody who navigates chapter 4 and 5 to call out what Bill's understanding and experience is. The problem of unmanageability. He ends his discussion on powerlessness, step 1, on page 43, but he's talking about addiction. There'll come a time and a place when we have no mental defense against the first drink. Then he goes into step 2. Well, what about unmanageability? Addiction only takes a percentage of the human race, 10% alcoholic, 50% substance and process addiction of a variety of kind. But it's only a percentage, and it's a small percentage. It's not the human race. Whereas now my interpretation of unmanageability has had nothing to do with addiction. That's why there's a dash and not an and. And it encompasses the entire human race. 100% of humanity is restless, irritable, and discontented, needs to go through a rite of passage to adulthood, different strokes for different folks. And for us, it's that awakening process of steps 4 through 9. And Bill says it in the big book, doesn't he, on page 84. When you finish step 9, addiction has been neutralized. Listen to the words. I'm quoting now, not paraphrasing, quoting. Page 84. We are placed in a position of neutrality. We are placed, of grace, in a position of neutrality. We're neither fighting it or resisting it or attracted to it. Neutral. That's why he uses the term in the second page of the big book, the second title page that has lots of words on it, not the least of which are the program where hundreds of people have recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body, placed in a position of neutrality. More about that in a minute. But then he says, when he talks about entering the world of the spirit, pages 84 and 85, transitioning into our way of life, we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve. We're not cured of what? Already dealt with addiction. My interpretation is I have to assume some things. Bill doesn't get it as clear as I think I'm going to articulate it. Not cured of our unmanageability. And we have a daily reprieve based on the use of the tools, 10, 11, and 12. He says, are these extravagant promises, the promises that are listed on pages 83 and 84 at the end of the 9th step? Are these extravagant? No, they will always manifest. Now I'm paraphrasing. They will always manifest if, I'm quoting now, if we work for them. This brings us to steps 10, 11, and 12. Well, what is unmanageability? This is one of the secrets. Those bedevilments on page 52 in chapter 4. I am having trouble with personal relationships. I make them personal and I make them present tense. And when I do that and then I read it out loud, I have a new experience with it. I can't control my emotional nature. 4 years, 10 years at sobriety, free of alcohol, free of my addiction, but restless, irritable, and discontented because I have instincts that go awry, as he says in the 12 and 12. I am a prey to misery and depression. I can't make a living. And in my meditation, I saw that nothing ever satisfied me. There's not enough pleasure, not enough adulation, not enough money, not enough power, not enough recognition. I'm a black hole. There's nothing that will satisfy me that's a material reality. That was a gift of my meditation about this particular line, because I was making a career living. I was just restless, irritable, and discontented with everything. I have a feeling of uselessness. I am full of fear. I am unhappy. At 4 to 10 years of sobriety, none of them were at the 10 level on a scale of 1 to 10, but they were someplace on the scale, maybe at the 2 level mosquitoes rather than at the 10 level white sharks. I can't seem to be of real help to other people. And in my meditation, it received the message, nor did I care really about helping people. I wanted the reputation of helping people, which reinforced the experience that I was having in terms of a therapy that I was involved in and trying to help to iron out some of the wrinkles in my emotions and my family of origin experiences. Secret number 2, what has not cured me? We enter the world of the spirit. Our body and our mind have been given freedom from the addiction, but our will is still in bondage of self. I've recovered because I've been placed in a position of neutrality through steps 1 through 9. If you haven't had the experience of freedom of addiction before that, it's guaranteed by the time you finish the 9th step. Don't tell me about halfway through. I understand what the promises say. My experience is when I finished the 9th step, I became aware that I had physical sobriety. But Bill says we're not cured at that point. This is the introduction to emotional sobriety. Those unhealthy dependencies on people and circumstances and life as it evolves are unhealthy dependencies. If you haven't read his letter that was in the Grapevine in 1958, just Google it, you'll find it. Dr. Berger and I are doing a series with the Berlin group on each step connected to emotional sobriety and the principles and the values. It's going to take a couple of years to unpack it. 1 month at one meeting a month. So what does it mean, daily reprieve? Not cured means that we have unmanageability. Unmanageability is the bondage of self. And that's an organic structural way that a human being is built. When we have a daily reprieve, what does that mean? Ask yourself, do you have a sense of well-being? Seriously. The word I use for my life for the last 35 years is that it flourishes. How close can you come to saying that about your current life? Does it flourish? Or are you plagued with serial suffering, as I mentioned at the beginning? Do you have a sense of contentment? This is not poetry. This is not speculation. I'm coming from my actual experience. 35 years, a sense of well-being, 35 years of contentment. I'm going to say something very outrageous. You're welcome to ask me questions about it. I'm sober 39 years, but I have not suffered. I have not suffered for 35 years. I've had pain. Life is filled with speed bumps, but I haven't suffered because I have the shock absorbers of this way of life that allows me to navigate the pain of life and stay relatively in perspective about it. My wife died 5 years ago, 52 years of marriage, and my best friend. Sure, that was very difficult, and I went through a grieving process. But rather than the 6 month that I anticipated, it took 2 years. But at the end of 2 years of a very conscious process, thanks to the community of the 12 steps and the process of the 12 steps and lots of support people, I was able to walk on level ground again after a couple of years. This awakening is the turning that we commit to in step 3. Made a decision to turn? What are we talking about? Turn from what to what? These are wonderful questions. The questions are really important. The answers will only have meaning if you have a healthy and correct question that you've really internalized, not just in your head, but in your soul as you adventure on this path. Turning from self-centeredness to other-centeredness. I see this now as spiritual sobriety. This coin of a relationship with other with a capital O, this relationship of contribution to others with a small o. My relationship with a power other than myself and my contribution to humanity. This is the coin of spiritual sobriety. Dr. Tebow said, Bill got it right. The first 9 steps are for the deflation of the ego at depth. It's a great phrase. The first 9 steps are for the deflation of the ego at depth. But then he said, the ego regenerates itself. It has this uncanny, organismic ability to regenerate itself, and we fall asleep. We are awake, and then we fall asleep, if in fact we become complacent with our awakening. One of the Russian philosophers, Gurdjieff, says, most human beings are asleep, dreaming that they're awake. I love phrases like that. Sources of very productive meditation. Maybe that's why today the zombie movies have such an attraction, because it's speaking to civilization that has fallen asleep, dreaming that they're awake, participating in a circus of entertainment that gives them the sense of, or the stimulus that they're actually living life, when in fact they're just waiting to die. Asleep, dreaming that they're awake. Our beliefs are our lenses through which we look at reality. And if our lenses are distorted, our emotions will be disturbed. That's what he says in the 12 and 12, doesn't he? It's a spiritual axiom. Whenever I'm disturbed, there's something wrong with me. It's a spiritual axiom. Think about it. Whenever I'm disturbed, there's something wrong with me. In his warm-up to the steps, he says, so our troubles are of our own making. I believe it's on page 62, where he discusses selfishness, self-centeredness. So our troubles are of my own making. It sounds very negative, but it's actually quite good news. If my troubles are of Patrick's making, I'm screwed, because he has to change in order for me to be okay. If my troubles are of my making, well, then I have hope, because I need to change, and then I will be okay. The lenses through which I look need to be reground through step 4, especially steps 4 through 7 specifically, to rehabilitate my relationship with myself. This brings us to the first piece of the work of our way of life, which is the daily practice of step 10. Is power necessary? Now, take a look at your life. Today, did you meditate? Yesterday, did you do a step 10 when disturbed? Yesterday, did you align yourself with principles 100% of the time? Yesterday, did you try to help somebody? This is not a negative judgment. This is an evaluation of your spiritual condition. And if you didn't do that, my conclusion is that you don't really believe that you need power. Not one of you didn't plug in your cell phone yesterday in order for it to have power today. Pretty interesting metaphor. I value the power of my cell phone or whatever other technology that you have, we have. Is power necessary? This is our way of living, to maintain our relationship with power. Clear the channel with a spot check inventory. That's what he calls it, spot check. To fill the channel with light. Use the metaphor of darkness and light here. To the extent I fill the channel with light, I'm able to be a lantern of light so that I can help other people based on my commitment to living in alignment with principles. My interpretation of the third step, using the word alignment. Not in the big book, but it's my word that captures the purpose of the third step, the commitment to 4 through 9, which in fact brings us to alignment. And step 10 gives us the ability to stay in alignment. Bill says, watch for the things that we saw in the 4th step, those instincts gone awry. And use the 10th step when we're disturbed. When I have the yellow blinking light on the dashboard, I know there's something wrong with the car. When I have a disturbed emotion and I'm conscious of it, there's something wrong with me. I'm out of alignment with my relationship with reality. And I'm powerless to be in alignment, so I pray. And I'm human, so I discuss. And if I'm disturbed, normally I'm going to disturb those around me, so I make amends. There may not be an amends necessary because I'm just disturbed. But in the very final analysis, and that's why it's in all caps, I turn my thoughts to helping somebody else. Step 10 has a 4-part formula, page 84. Pray because I'm powerless. Discuss because I'm human. Amend because I probably am harmed somebody, but in the final analysis, the final turnaround from my self-centeredness, which created my disturbance, is to begin thinking about other people. That's the brilliance of Bill in the 10th step. He doesn't say actually that we help anybody in the 10th step. He said we turn our thoughts to helping somebody else, with the understanding of good psychology that as we think, so eventually we will act. And then I make up what will be the promises, what will be the outcome, what will be the results of this process. The opposite of resentment is forgiveness, a decision. Look at my hand. Look it up in the dictionary. Forgiveness, a decision to release. And as the Lord's Prayer says, when we release them from debt, we are released. And the St. Francis prayer says, when we forgive them, we are forgiven. A paradox that is, in fact, my experience. The opposite of fear is trust. Read page 68. Bill says self-reliance versus God-reliance. That's the secret to the fear and the removal of fear. A process of trusting, a process of identifying the sources of the fear, the exact nature of the fear, as we did with resentments. Identify the exact nature of our resentments in column 3, our beliefs that are distorted, and in column 4, our motives that are corrupt. And in both cases, resentment and fear, he said, and we're powerless to relieve ourselves, so we pray. In the final analysis, again, we pray. The opposite of dishonesty is honesty. Pretty straightforward. He spends the first page of How It Works, chapter 5, page 58, talking about the benefits of and the need for rigorous honesty. Almost the entire page of the first page of the chapter, How It Works, rigorous honesty. That's how important it is. Transparency. My insides and my outsides match. The opposite of selfishness and self-centeredness is other-centeredness. To be helpful, I'd like to translate it out of the word service. I don't use the word service any longer. It's too sophisticated, said the Spirit to me in my meditation. Use the word help because it has earth in it. It has dirt in it. It has frustration in it. You will be challenged when you're helping other people. It will be inconvenient. But this is emotional sobriety. That is course correction when I'm out of alignment. When I'm in alignment, I have serenity. When I'm out of alignment, I'm disturbed. The whole point of the turning is to be back in alignment with reality. I don't need to use spiritual terminology or God as I don't understand it. I can use words that really can just say, oh, this makes such sense to me. That our way of living, Bill says, we grow in understanding and effectiveness when we improve our consciousness, when we enlarge our compassion. Improve is in step 11, enlarge is in his own story on page 14. It's an explanation for, in Jim's story, the guy who put a little whiskey in his milk, pages 35 to 37, he says he failed to enlarge his spiritual life, but he doesn't tell us there what it means. Wonderfully connected, the big book Organic is written by Bill, so we get in his own story what he means by enlarging his spiritual life. Take a look at the bottom of page 14. We perfect and enlarge our spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others. Sacrifice comes from the Latin sacer, meaning holy, and facere, meaning to make. Sacrifice, to make us whole. Take a look at the top of page 14. He has a wonderful summary of the whole process of turning and the practice of our way of living. Simple but not easy. I'm quoting, simple but not easy, a price has to be paid. It means the destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the light. I must turn to all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. Light and darkness. We're either going for the light or we're going for the darkness, he said. We don't need rules. We don't need regulations. We don't need discipline. Life and alcohol will discipline us. We're either going for the light or we're going for the darkness. We grow in understanding and effectiveness. We grow in our consciousness and we grow in our compassion. The spiritual coin of steps 11 and 12. Well, prayer and meditation. It's so misunderstood. It's one of the better kept secrets in the room. And there's lots of reasons for it, which I won't go into today. But meditation in the big book, pages 85 to 88, is the best description of the practice of meditation, how to do it and why to do it, that I've ever come across before or after. Bill says, upon awakening, we ask God to direct our thinking. This man said, it's a prayer, Herb, anytime we're talking to God. God, please direct my thinking. No, that's not very complicated. And then the book says we think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans. It's all in the book. What's not in the book, though, was this man's experience, which was the key that unlocked the door for me for meditation. I was a monk for 7 years. I was 7 years silent in a monastery. And I came away hanging up my black robe and not meditating again for another 25 years. What's that? Well, that's a person who didn't understand what they were doing and why they were doing it and how to do it. And at 4 years of sobriety, I thought out enough to hear this man's instruction in the 11th step He said, we ask God to direct our thinking. God, please direct my thinking. Then the big book says we begin thinking. I think about my day. I consider my plans. And then he said, here's the key. Listen to your thinking as the possible answer to your prayer. God speaks to you through your thinking. God speaks to you through your feelings. God speaks to you through your imagination. God speaks to you through your memory. God speaks to you through your sensations. God speaks to you through your fantasies. It resolved the problem of meditation for me. And since 1988, I have meditated on a daily basis with maybe missing a half a dozen times in 35 years. Because I now know how to do it. And Bill says in the 12 and 12, why to do it? Other than we connect to power and we get guidance and we get knowledge and we get strength, which is what's in the 11th step, isn't it? Praying for the knowledge of God's will and the power to carry it out. But in the 12 and 12, he gets it really very, I mean, it couldn't be clearer. As air, water, sunshine, and food nourishes the body, prayer and meditation nourishes the survival of the soul. You have to ask yourself, do you believe it? You have to ask yourself in that conversation, are you doing it? Because if you're not doing it, you don't believe it. I'm sorry, I don't mean to make you, yes, I do. I do intend to make you uncomfortable. Here to comfort the disturbed and to disturb the comfortable, you've heard it before. As I said in my opening comments, what you do reveals to you what you believe, what your values are. All day long, try to be aware. Pause when agitated. Ask for guidance. The total purpose of step 11 is guidance. If you want to improve your consciousness, it's a daily practice. I normally recommend people start with 1 minute of intentional consciousness, not prayer, not reading, not writing. 1 minute of thinking, listening to your thinking in the milieu of prayer. I suggest to set aside prayer as a preface to the process. But 1 minute, well, a lot of people push back, it's not enough. Well, it's 1 minute more than you're doing right now, and allow the Spirit to lead you forward. Most teachers talk about a 20-minute commitment is the goal. I went from 5 minutes to 10 minutes to 15 minutes, stayed there for about a year. Then went to the 20 minutes. Now I'm retired. I have more time and it probably goes a little bit longer than that. I used to have a timer when it was relevant. Now I don't. And the timer told me when I was done. One of my spiritual directors indicated that there's only 2 mistakes that you can make in meditation. There's only 2 mistakes. One, not show up. The other, leave early. So show up, don't leave early. If it's a minute, it's a minute. The timer will tell you when you're done. If it's 20, it's 20 minutes. The timer will tell you when you're done. You don't have to be distracted. This is a method, not a technique. It's an action based on faith. The assumption, of course, of step 11 is that you have a healthy relationship with steps 2 and 3. Power is, and power is available. 2 and 3 respectively. We don't have to get fancy. Do you believe there is a power? Do you believe you need a power? Do you believe the power is available? It's the ABCs on page 60, isn't it? God could and would. Could has the power, would has the caring. The book has such internal integrity. Bill was brilliant in his construction, but I needed help to interpret it. I could not read it, despite my level of intelligence, knowledge, and background. I could not read the big book and understand it. I needed help. I needed a step guide. I needed an interpreter. Meditation is a awareness, not a feeling. It's an act of faith, not knowledge or certitude. It's an experience, not a task. To improve consciousness, we grow in understanding and effectiveness. Understanding in our mind, effectiveness in our will and behavior. Becoming a lantern. This is my image I've adopted in the last 5 years. To become a lantern, keeping the lens clean with step 10. Having the light burn bright in me. I'm not the light, but I sit in the presence of the light, improving the light, improving my conscious contact. This is the change that Bill promises in step 12, isn't it? The spiritual awakening, a change in the way we think and feel and behave. Read Appendix 2. This is a summary. An awakening is a change in the way I think and feel and behave. And it's done to me, not by me. But not without me. That willingness and grace combination. My willingness to take action and the grace to even have the willingness, let alone the action. A process, not an event. Think about the dimmer switch. We get physically sober and detox, and then we get emotionally sober with practicing the 10th step and being in alignment with reality. Then we allow ourselves and we foster our guidance through prayer and meditation and our practice of step 12 in compassion. And the light gets bright and our lives flourish. But in the same way, disintegration begins when we compromise principle. I heard it about a year or two ago in one of the things I was reading. The first compromise of principle is the relapse, not the drink, not the engagement in the process of addiction. That's the evidence of the relapse. The relapse happened with the first compromise of principle. Boy, that's rigorous. The first compromise of principle. Out of alignment with reality, the obsession returns. Because insanity returns, because we're not connected effectively to power and the darkness descends and we're back in our addiction. A subtle integration of spiritual awakening, as Bill calls it, gradual, glacially slow in my case. But nevertheless, I was delivered. Hear the words, I'm using Bill's words. He had a spiritual experience, that mystical mountaintop. I didn't. But I still was delivered to freedom from alcohol, and then I was delivered from freedom of bondage of myself. And I continue to be progressively delivered from all the subtleties and sophistication of the variations of self-centeredness. But the dimmer switch can go down a notch at a time, and the disintegration can happen just as subtly without knowing that we're knowing, and then wondering why we're back in our addiction. Bill says that nothing will so much ensure immunity. Page 89, chapter 7, working with others, that first line. Nothing will so much ensure immunity as intensive work with others. Pretty dramatic. Immunity, we're all so sensitive to that word today after the pandemic. Working with others is the immunization that prevents the relapse. Shining the light on the path for others, becoming a lantern, lighting the path. This is our way of life, our practice of being turned. The world of self, steps 1 through 9. The world of the spirit, steps 10 through 11 and a 12. Optimal recovery, freedom from addiction, optimal living, a life that flourishes. Our way of living, Bill says, keeping our heads in the clouds and our feet on the ground. He just keeps it so simple. Our head in the clouds, step 11, prayer and meditation. Our feet on the ground, really straightforward and simple. Willing to be available to help others in the broadest of senses. Not that anybody has to become a sponsor or a step guide, but that each person is invited based on their competency and their experience to contribute to the people around them. Not necessarily in a 12-step program. Maybe it's your family, maybe it's your church, maybe it's your community, maybe it's your workplace to contribute. This is our way of life, 10, 11, and 12. This is our way of living, practicing on a daily basis. I find that I need to hold myself accountable. I have a sponsor I talk to once a month. Periodically, I have a step guide that helps me navigate through the steps and or a particular step. More often than not these days, I talk to a spiritual director who's not in the program, but has a deep understanding and an intuitive ability to have a relationship of telling me the truth. Thanks very much.